Some stories don't begin with a scream. They begin with a quiet life that never saw the storm coming. He wasn't famous. He wasn't rich. He wasn't hiding from anyone. That's what made this story hit harder than most. The victim lived a life that looked painfully normal from the outside, the kind of life people scroll past every day without stopping. A steady routine, familiar streets, a few close people, and plans that felt permanent. Nothing about him screamed danger. Nothing hinted at an ending this brutal. He was someone's son, someone's friend, someone who laughed at the wrong moments and worried about the future like everyone else. His days were built on habits: work, home, repeat. He believed in keeping his head down and doing things the right way. No enemies, no dark past, no warning signs. That's what made what came next feel unreal. The setting wasn't dramatic. No dark alley, no abandoned warehouse, just an ordinary place in an ordinary neighborhood where people locked their doors at night, believing that was enough. The kind of area where neighbors nodded but didn't really know each other. Safe, predictable, comfortable, until it wasn't. The discovery didn't happen in a movie-style moment. No dramatic music, no slow-motion shock. It was quiet, too quiet. A moment where something felt off, a call unanswered, a door that shouldn't have been locked, a silence that didn't fit the pattern. Then reality hit. What was found changed everything. The scene didn't just mark the end of a life, it shattered the illusion of safety for everyone connected to him. Time split into two parts: before the world knew, after the truth couldn't be undone. For the family, grief didn't arrive politely. It crashed in without warning. Shock first, denial second, then the kind of pain that doesn't scream. It just sits heavy in the chest. Questions without answers, regret over things never said, the haunting thought that maybe something could have been noticed earlier. Friends replayed memories like broken footage. Conversations suddenly felt loaded. Inside jokes turned into reminders of what was gone. The loss didn't feel real, not yet, because part of them still expected him to walk through the door. But he never did. Law enforcement stepped in, not with certainty, but with confusion. From the start, the case felt wrong. The details didn't line up cleanly. This wasn't a random act. This wasn't chaos. There was intention here, and that made it more disturbing. Every detail mattered now. Every hour counted, because when a life like this ends suddenly, the biggest fear isn't just who did it, it's why, and that question lingered in the air. The neighborhood changed overnight. Doors stayed locked longer. Conversations dropped to whispers. People started looking at each other differently, wondering what they didn't really know, who they didn't really trust. This wasn't just a murder, it was a reminder that danger doesn't always look dangerous, that monsters don't announce themselves, and that sometimes the most heartbreaking stories begin in places that felt completely safe. As the investigation moved forward, one thing became clear. This wasn't going to be a simple case, and the truth, when it surfaced, would be far more disturbing than anyone expected. Because the real story wasn't just about how he died, it was about the secrets that surfaced after. The investigation didn't start with confidence. It started with confusion. When police stepped deeper into the case, One thing became clear almost immediately. This wasn't random, and it wasn't simple. The scene spoke in fragments, not answers. Nothing screamed chaos, yet nothing made sense either. It felt planned, but not clean. Every true crime case has a moment where reality shifts. This was it. Detectives began reconstructing the victim's final days, hour by hour. They didn't look for drama, they looked for patterns. Phone logs, last messages, missed calls, tiny digital footprints people forget they leave behind. Because in modern cases, the truth almost always hides in the smallest details. And the details started whispering. At first, everything pointed toward a normal routine: work, home, familiar faces. But then the timeline started bending. Small gaps appeared, moments unaccounted for, conversations that didn't fully line up, a meeting that felt unnecessary, a decision that in hindsight looked dangerous. That's when suspicion entered the room, not as a person, but as a feeling. Investigators began asking the hard questions. Who was the last person to see him alive? Who knew his schedule? Who benefited from his silence? These weren't accusations, they were pressure points. And pressure reveals things people try to hide. Witnesses were cooperative, but cautious. Some remembered details too clearly. Others remembered almost nothing at all. And that difference mattered. Because fear doesn't always make people talk. Sometimes it makes them forget. Then came the evidence. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just cold, quiet proof. Forensics didn't paint a full picture, but they confirmed one unsettling truth: the act wasn't impulsive. Whoever did this knew what they were doing, or at least thought they did. That changed everything. Attention slowly shifted toward the victim's inner circle: friends, acquaintances, people who knew his habits. Because statistically, the most dangerous person isn't a stranger, it's someone who already has access. And suddenly, motives began forming. Not money, not jealousy in the obvious sense, something deeper, something personal. Detectives uncovered tension that never reached the surface publicly. Disagreements brushed off as nothing serious. Situations explained away as misunderstandings. The kind of conflicts people ignore until they explode. And then there was the behavior after the crime. That's where cracks really showed. Some people were too calm, too composed. Others were overly emotional, almost rehearsed. Grief can look different on everyone, but guilt has patterns, and experienced investigators recognize them. A name started circling quietly, not announced, not accused, just noted. As questioning intensified, stories began shifting, small changes at first, times adjusted, locations blurred. Then contradictions surfaced. And once contradictions appear, they don't disappear. Pressure mounted. The case that once felt directionless now had momentum, and with momentum came fear. Because when the truth gets close, people panic. Mistakes happen. Alibis fall apart. Silence becomes louder than words. Behind closed doors, law enforcement prepared for the next step. They knew moving too fast could destroy the case. Moving too slow could let the truth slip away. Outside, the community waited. Speculation spread. Trust eroded.
Everyone wanted answers, but no one wanted to believe they might recognize the face behind them. Because the most terrifying realization wasn't that someone did this, it was that the person might have been hiding in plain sight. And as the evidence stacked up, one thing became unavoidable. This story wasn't just about a murder anymore. It was about betrayal, about the cost of silence, and about how close danger can sit before it finally strikes. The investigation was reaching a breaking point, and soon someone would have to answer for it.
There's a moment in every investigation when silence becomes impossible. This was that moment. After weeks of pressure, unanswered questions, and stories that kept changing shape, law enforcement made their move. Not loudly, not publicly, quietly. Because when you're dealing with someone who thinks they're in control, the worst thing you can do is warn them. The arrest didn't happen in chaos. It happened in calm. No resistance, no dramatic chase, just a look. The kind of look that says someone knows the game is over, even if they won't admit it yet. To the outside world, it seemed sudden. To investigators, it was inevitable. Charges were filed, serious ones, the kind that don't leave room for misunderstanding. And just like that, the story shifted again. Inside the interrogation room, time slowed. Every word mattered. Every pause was noted. This wasn't about forcing a confession. It was about letting pressure do the work. The suspect didn't break immediately. They talked, they explained, they justified. People rarely confess outright. They reveal themselves in pieces. The first version of the story sounded clean, too clean. Then came the second version, then the third. Each one slightly different, each one weaker than the last. Investigators didn't interrupt. They let the contradictions stack, because lies collapse under their own weight if you give them enough space. And slowly, the mask began to slip. Court proceedings turned the private tragedy into a public reckoning. The courtroom wasn't loud, it was tense. Family members sat frozen, hearing details they never wanted to know. Friends struggled to reconcile memories with accusations. The accused sat still, expression controlled, as if emotion itself was something to suppress. Prosecutors laid out the timeline piece by piece, not theatrically, methodically. Messages, movements, decisions, each one small on its own, devastating together. The story wasn't told as a single moment of violence, but as a chain of choices that led to one irreversible outcome. The defense tried to create doubt. That's their job. They spoke of uncertainty, of alternative explanations, of missing pieces. But doubt only works when facts are solid, and these facts were solid. Then came the testimony. Witnesses didn't speak dramatically, they spoke honestly, and honesty has weight, especially when it comes from people who once trusted the accused. When loyalty cracks in open court, it echoes. Psychological experts explained behavior patterns, not to excuse them, but to explain them. Control, resentment, obsession, the kind of emotions that don't explode, they simmer. As the trial unfolded, something became clear. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was a crime of decision, and decisions have consequences. The verdict arrived quietly. No gasp, no applause,
just a heavy stillness as words were read aloud, words that would define the rest of several lives forever. For the family, justice didn't feel like relief, it felt like confirmation, the truth they feared, spoken out loud. Closure, if it exists at all, came with scars attached. Outside the courtroom, the world kept moving. Traffic didn't stop. People went back to work. And that realization hurt almost as much as the verdict itself, that life continues even when someone's life has ended. But the story wasn't over, because the real impact wasn't just legal, it was psychological. The case left behind questions that don't fade easily, about trust, about warning signs people miss, about how close darkness can sit before it reveals itself. The victim was gone, the truth was out, but the ripple effect had only begun. And in the final moments of the trial, one thought lingered in every mind. If this could happen here, it could happen anywhere.
Some stories don't end when the verdict is read. They linger. Long after the courtroom emptied, long after the headlines moved on, this case continued living in quiet spaces. Empty rooms, unfinished conversations, and memories that refuse to fade. Justice had a name now, a sentence attached to it, but grief doesn't follow legal timelines. For the family, life never returned to normal because normal no longer existed. They learned how to live around the absence. Birthdays became reminders, holidays felt incomplete, even silence carried weight. The victim wasn't just someone they lost, he became someone they carried with them, everywhere. In photos, in habits, in moments where laughter suddenly turned into stillness. Friends changed too. Some grew closer, bonded by shared loss. Others drifted away, unable to face the constant reminder. Guilt followed many of them. Guilt for not noticing signs, not asking harder questions, not showing up one more time. That guilt didn't come from blame, it came from love. The community never fully forgot. The place where it happened stopped feeling neutral. People passed it more quickly. Parents held their children tighter. Neighbors became more observant, but also more suspicious. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal easily. This case didn't just expose a crime, it exposed a truth people avoid. Danger doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it blends in. Sometimes it smiles back. Psychologists later described the case as a textbook example of ignored warning signs, not obvious red flags, subtle ones. Patterns people excuse because they don't want to believe something bad could happen here. That denial, more than anything, became part of the tragedy. And that's the message this story leaves behind. Not fear, awareness, because most victims don't realize they're in danger until it's too late. Most people around them don't realize it either. Evil doesn't always look evil. Sometimes it looks ordinary. Sometimes it looks familiar. The system did what it could. The law spoke. Accountability was delivered, but justice didn't undo what was done. It only drew a line that says this mattered, this life mattered, this loss will not be ignored. In the end, the victim became more than a name in a case file. He became a reminder to check in,
to listen more closely, to take discomfort seriously instead of brushing it off. Because the most heartbreaking part of this story isn't how it ended, it's how preventable it might have been. The final takeaway isn't about violence, it's about silence. Silence before the crime, silence during the warning signs, silence that allowed things to grow unchecked. And that's why this story resonates so deeply. Not because it's shocking, but because it feels possible. As the screen fades to black, one thought stays with the audience. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And maybe, just maybe, remembering that could save someone else from becoming the next story we hear too late.